of our presentations. Andy's gonna be facilitating the second half here, but I'm still gonna be running the PowerPoint. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that queued up. Laura Jo, you're first up. Okay, Laura Jo, if you're off.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I got it. Good evening, everybody. Really appreciate being here. As you know, the Forest Service, Coconino National Forest, manages a great portion of the Rio de Flag watershed. We're going to start with some of the conditions historically that we're trying to manage our way toward. But one of the things I really want to emphasize is that of all the various uses that we manage, we're trying to manage them in a way that maintains or enhances the health and sustainability of the watershed. So the bottom line is always the health of the watershed, regardless of the uses or the activities that we engage in across the landscape. So historical conditions that we're managing toward, we had in these ponderosa pine systems up in the upper reaches of the watershed, fire return interval every 2 to 15 years, widely spaced trees in the ponderosa pine, probably 80 trees per acre average. Low intensity fire come through again every 2 to 5 years, a grass understory, very cool fire, just cleaning up the forest floor. Next slide. And move forward to what we are experiencing today are these densely stocked stands through years and years of fire suppression. And of course, these stands compete with each other for nutrients, become very susceptible to insects and disease, as was mentioned earlier. And that, of course, makes them ripe for a wildfire situation that is not low intensity, that is of high severity. So that's what we're trying to prevent here up in the upper slopes in the ponderosa pine system. Next slide. And of course, add on to the complexity of all of that, the stress on the system with the climate changes. I don't even need to explain these. You see the red is bad. It's dry, it's hot, and it doesn't seem our outlook for the future is going to look a whole lot brighter in terms of reversing that scenario. So managing for a sustainable landscape that can withstand the effects of climate change is going to be very important. Next slide. And as all of you experienced back in 2019, you remember the museum fire. And I'm showing this picture just to show you what our ideal situation is that as we had fire across the peaks in these systems, and fire is something we want in the system. We want to have it occur naturally, but we want it to burn similar to what the blue area is showing you here, that very low intensity burn that burns just, low flame lengths, low severity, doesn't harm the soils. Unfortunately, the sad irony of this fire is that it occurred during right in the middle of our of some mechanical treatments we were doing in the area. And unfortunately, that left us with a condition of a lot of slash still on the ground, some decks that were stacked that caused some high severity burn in parts of the burn area. Burn area in total was nearly 2,000 acres. And these high severity burn areas are ones that we're watching. We're watching for soils that have lost their ability for water to permeate, and as a result, of course, can create a situation where there's some downstream flooding. Fortunately, we've not experienced a lot of downstream flooding in the 2 seasons since then. Of course, the bad side of that is that it's because it hasn't rained. So I guess that's a mixed blessing there. Next slide. And I won't get into this, and it's not important that you understand exactly what you're seeing here, but what this is a map of the Flagstaff Ranger District's prescribed fire program. And the colors refer to different years that we're planning to go in, and we go in repeatedly over these areas. For a first entry, prescribed fire, A second entry after mechanical treatments, we go in and maintain these areas with fire, trying to replicate what natural conditions would allow under a controlled situation. Because as you can see, we're trying to protect those areas, those communities of Flagstaff and those communities south of us as well. So this is our program. We're very strategic and very assertive about how we use fire on the landscape. I think all of you are probably aware of that if you've lived here a while. And pretty proud of this program and find it's been pretty successful in achieving what we're trying to do in restoring some areas and protecting the communities at the same time. Next slide. And the next slide is our mechanical thinning. So we are rockstar timber folks on the Flagstaff Ranger District put together this neato map of all the mechanical treatments happening within the watershed area right now. About 6,000 acres of mechanical treatment already completed, around 10,000 in progress in somewhere along the continuum of progress, and then 4,500 acres still planned. So again, we're trying to create those conditions historically that would allow fire to play its natural role in the watershed so that we can burn through these areas safely and at low intensity to protect the watershed values and the values, of course, around our communities. Next slide. And here's just an example of what it would look like. You've probably seen pictures of like this before. On the right-hand side, again, is the kind of condition we're trying to recreate. This is what it looked like historically. And we've had a lot of success with fire starts in here because when you open up the canopy like this and you have areas like this, we have people who love to camp in these areas. And oftentimes we get starts in these areas from abandoned campfires and whatnot. We had several of those just this last spring in the, up the 180 corridor. And because these areas had been treated, our folks had a relatively easy time getting around these fires before they took hold anywhere. So those are the conditions we're trying to recreate. Next slide. And so I wanted to just move on. There's more than just forest restoration that we manage. Obviously, recreation. We have the biking and the hiking and everything that we're familiar with up in the high country. Down in the lowlands where there is surface water, abundance of wildlife. Birding is an activity where it's very popular. These riparian areas are very precious to us, something we try to manage carefully, and we're excited about the work of this alliance and what we're trying to do in the riparian areas and watersheds here that sustain our systems in this area. Next slide. But one of the challenges that we do have with recreation in the area is one of many, but it's one that hits home for a lot of you, is the camping and campfires in and around the area of Flagstaff. And so we have restrictions in that area. We recognize there's huge issues with human waste and trash, and also, high risk of abandoned campfires when they occur that close to town. So we do have a corridor. This is not a great map that really dials it in, but we do have a restricted area around the city to protect those the watersheds and the city itself from those impacts. Next slide. Last but not least, I wanted to just briefly mention the cultural sites that are just all over this area, heritage sites. This area is rich in those types of sites, long history of land use. I cannot overemphasize. I'm so glad Max is the one who kicked us off on this meeting. The San Francisco Peaks being a sacred site. It is the San Francisco Peaks are the ground zero of sacred sites in the country. It's where it all started. It's an important area, traditional cultural property, and is eligible for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. Can't say enough about that. The sacredness of the peaks to our local tribes is something very important to us and a consideration in everything we do. So that's it. That's a balance. That's the nutshell of all the things we try to manage and balance as we protect the watersheds in the Rio de Flag.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura Jo. As you transition out of presentation mode, there are a couple of questions for you in the chat box. If you could get to those and reply to everyone, that would be great. Okay, next up, Travis Woolley with the Nature Conservancy. Go ahead, Travis.
Right. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to hear everybody's presentations and learn more about what this group is up to. Thanks, Laura Jo, for kind of setting up my presentation well. I'm going to talk a little bit more at the 10,000 foot level about restoration. You can go to the next slide. And specifically forest restoration, but I think that a lot of what I'm going to talk about applies to restoration in general and more of the big R, comprehensive restoration across our natural resources and forests and other systems. And so why do we do restoration? You know, in the areas around Flagstaff, forest restoration is particularly important for fire and flood prevention. You see images here from the Schultz fire and the Schultz flood. And we really want to prevent these types of events from happening and affecting our communities in pretty substantial ways. So next slide. But I want to talk too a little bit about some of the other co-benefits of forest restoration and thinking about, you know, what we gain when we go out and reduce those densities that Laura Jo was showing us earlier. And so on the left, you can see, and from previous presentations, we have a pretty large watershed area, and in some of our work that we've done in TNC, we've really looked at how, in addition to water quality changes that we get from preventing large wildfires and flooding, water quantity can also be affected by restoration activities at large scales. And so we found in the, for instance, in the Verde and Salt watersheds, through some modeling efforts, that large scale forest restoration could actually increase surface flow up to somewhere around 20%. And so thinning those trees, it's pretty straightforward seeming, but you know, lots of trees suck up lots of water and transpire that to the atmosphere. And so when we reduce those tree densities, we actually keep more water in the system. And one of the projects that we're currently working on with some NAU colleagues is to look at the effects on snowpack retention as well. And so as we open up forests in certain ways, we can retain more snowpack, which puts more water into that system as well. Next slide. The other co-benefit that we've looked a lot at is carbon. And so, you know, thinking about the Rio de Flag watershed is you know, part of a much larger watershed in the Colorado River Basin. But then even thinking more broadly, our dry forests around Flagstaff are part of, you know, a lot of dry forests across Western North America. And when we begin to think about scaling that restoration up and increasing the pace and scale of thinning treatments to prevent fire and other co-benefits, we also see a lot of benefits in terms of carbon and climate change. And so we've recently done some work where we looked at how forestry specifically, and we're expanding that across the Western United States, is how we can see large increases in carbon storage and stabilizing that carbon by reducing those large wild and severe wildfires. And so there's some feedback loops there, because storing more carbon helps us with the climate change. And then that also, you know, reduces the effects of large wildfires. And so when we think about forest restoration, this larger context, although we're talking about a small watershed around a community, has much larger impacts across larger scales. So next slide. And so they also asked me to talk a little bit about partnerships and restoration success. And so I mentioned FORFRI, or the Forest Restoration Initiative. A lot of work that Laura Jo kind of presented is within that large landscape. And really the partnerships and successes that we've seen from a environmental planning framework have really been due to the partnerships, the stakeholder groups, and really the shared ownership of that landscape. And similarly around Flagstaff, we see that with the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project as well, which is part of some of that work that Laura Jo was showing in terms of thinning and restoration treatments. And so, you know, the value really can't be understated for these types of partnerships and community involvement. You know, shared ownership, again, adding capacity and resources, and then bringing diverse perspectives, to me, creates better solutions no matter what we're working on. In this context, restoration really benefits from those large partnerships and the ability of folks to come together around a common problem and really help push that forward. Next slide, please. And so another thing that we've done a lot in restoration around Flagstaff and the larger 4FRI and FWPP efforts is really thinking about innovation and really how we can kind of push the envelope on working together in these partnerships to come up with new solutions for problems that we haven't faced before. And so with forest restoration, some of that work involves, economics and how do we deal with wood supplies and how do we create markets and create, new ways of thinking about low value products that we haven't managed in the past in terms of timber. But then also, how do we change business practices and how do we modernize and bring in things like tablet technology to the work we're doing? And so I think, these examples are really specific to forest restoration, but they do, can transport into any type of restoration. And so what I would hope, people would take from this is just as we think about restoration in the Rio de Flag watershed or any of the work we're doing is thinking outside of the box and pushing that envelope and not just doing what we've done in the past and think about how we can make future efforts more innovative. Next slide. So I wanted to end with a couple, an opportunity and a challenge as suggested by Carrie and Andy. So I do think that the community is our opportunity. I think just seeing all the people here on a Zoom meeting during dinner time on a weeknight shows that there's a lot of people that care about this watershed and the significance of it culturally and environmentally and just recreational, all the other benefits that we all seek from the area we live in. And so I think our opportunity really is to kind of springboard from that community and partnership that I think we're all here for to learn more about. So next slide. And then from, a forest restoration perspective around the, Rio de Flag watershed, this is going to be a pretty important component, at least to the forested areas that are part of this watershed, as Laura Jo, much of that is managed by the Forest Service. And so economic investment, I think, is our big challenge and probably will be with other restoration efforts. I think that was mentioned already once in one of the presentations or comments, but economics and how we get investment into these things. I think we've got the community, the people that care, the people that understand, but we need to get money to kind of fund these opportunities and ways to do restoration. So thank you.
Thank you, Travis. We're going to bring it a little into the backyards a little bit. Sarah Dector with the City of Flagstaff is next. Go ahead, Sarah.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yay. Hi, everyone. I see some familiar names and faces out there. For those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Dector. I have a long title. I'm the Comprehensive and Neighborhood Planning Manager for the city. So that means I have a very small staff. There's just 3 of us. And we look at long-range land use planning issues citywide. And so we kind of take the long view. We're looking at 20, 40, 80, 100 years. What does Flagstaff look like? How does it adapt to growth? What's going to change? So we deal with everything from like how we're integrating automated vehicles and vehicle electrification to natural resource pieces because they're all tied to land use in one way or another. The Rio de Flag, the Friends of the Rio and the city have been partnering together for the last 4 years. It started with an EPA environmental justice grant to understand how the Rio de Flag can be a community asset and what issues and challenges need to be addressed to achieve a shared vision from that social and cultural perspective. Next slide, please. So the importance of the Rio de Flag in the built environment, I can't overlook the story of how complex it is. It's not simply, I wish it was easy enough to say that it is a beautiful amenity of natural resources and recreational opportunities that everyone and all the visitors to the community can enjoy equally. But as you can see from these pictures, there are areas of the Rio where that is not the case. Many of us ride our bicycle or fish with our family on the Rio, but for residents of the South Side, for the past 100 years, the African American, Hispanic, and low-income residents of this neighborhood have been impacted heavily by flooding, both socially and financially. And so this is a long-standing environmental justice issue for the community that we've spent quite a few years talking about with them. We've kind of captured all those discussions in the Southside Community Specific Plan that was recently adopted by the City Council. So if you want to this is the way survey course of that information. We're not going to go crazy in depth tonight, but there is a future meeting on January 20th with Deb Harris, who's the executive director of the Southside Community Association, and Jack Welch and a few other people to talk about Rio for the people. So if you want really in-depth understanding of how the Southside came to be and how this flooding has been affecting the community, there'll be a talk later in the series that'll go more in depth on that. So next slide, please. So there's a lot of big things that have been going on or could be going on soon in the Rio within the city limits that interact with the built environment. And one is the Rio de Flag Army Corps of Engineers flood control project. This project has been in the work for over 25 years. It's a very complex and will be a transformative project that's been very controversial with parts of the community. But the goal of this project is to remove the floodplain from the south side and parts of downtown. In particular, it's important to know that the route of the Rio de Flag through the south side is a man-made route of the Rio. It did not occur there. People in the south side have told me stories of their uncles and grandfathers actually being paid to dig the ditch that eventually flooded their own homes. And so we call that sometimes the Little Rio. But this flood control project would move the Rio back to its original alignment, and it would also have the impact of recreating some parts of the channel in order to be able to manage both a composite channel, flood walls, access roads, some other things that maybe haven't been part of this landscape before. But at the same time, it's also poses an opportunity. This is an example of one of the presentation slides that was presented to City Council on October 22nd. So if you want all the details of this presentation, which took like an hour and a half and I'm giving you 3 minutes on, you can go to the City Council website, and I'll put the link in the bottom where you can find all the videos, and you'll find the October 22nd City Council and be able to navigate to this. So when I'm done chatting, I'll throw in a couple links in the chat so you guys can get more resources. But this idea is that, you know, the flood wall and some of these improvements, it doesn't mean that that has to be, you know, an area that's unattractive or doesn't incorporate the natural features of the Rio. And that's part of what people are hoping to see when the area is fully restored after construction. So this picture is the ball fields right south of Beale Street and north of Clark Homes. So this is one example, and there are many, many more that Norris Design helped put together so that we could visualize what this project might look like for different segments of the Rio. So next slide. Another big planning effort for the city that is starting in this summer is that the John Wesley Powell, it's too far back. The John Wesley Powell Boulevard area, which currently 4th Street kind of dead ends into a dirt road at Butler Avenue. And then John Wesley Powell Boulevard hits a dead end right to the east of Lone Tree Road. There's a vast area of private land. And the Rio through this area starts at the I-40 wetlands, goes to the south and east, and then north and east up to Fox Glen. So this area is all private land, and Arizona is a state where private land is heavily protected in its ability to be developed. And so while we have some zoning code provisions that allow us to protect natural resources, it doesn't protect everything, and it doesn't protect, it's always a work in progress of how we work with private property owners to ensure that the most valuable natural resources get protected and not developed on a site. So we are doing some proactive planning in the John Wesley Powell Boulevard area, including a specific plan that's going to look at public infrastructure and utilities, including parks and open space. We did a presentation on this also on October 22nd, so you'll be able to find it on the streaming website. But there will be new developments out here. The Canyon del Rio has already been platting, and they are basically going to be selling lots and starting to build infrastructure soon, much like you've seen out on the west side in Timber Sky. Juniper Point, which is over on the west side of this area, southwest corner, was recently sold in the last year, and there's a new developer that is looking to develop those lots and those parcels and subdivide the area. And then there's a lot of parcels in between, including the state land parcel that you'll see the orange dotted line of the Arizona National Scenic Trail goes through, was recently sold at auction, and it was purchased by a developer named Symmetry that also has plans to develop their parcel and build neighborhoods and commercial centers and other things. So the position of the city is we have to be thinking ahead with these property owners in order to ensure the best community benefits that we can achieve through the planning processes and the legal mechanisms that we do have in managing private land development. So this is our concept plan roughly of what that could look like. It's actually probably a pretty hopeful map, I think, in a lot of ways. We show that there's some open green space, especially along the Rio. That's probably some of the highest priority area to see protected. But when we look at this, it doesn't evenly impact all the properties within this area. And so that is a huge challenge. How do we get those resources that we want protected concentrated when they might be 20% of one person's property and 5% of another's? So we need to start talking to property owners, talking to the community, and figuring out how we're going to address this piece so that we don't lose these resources to private development. Another piece of it is that we do have a 30-foot easement, just 30 feet. That's about as wide as a foot's trail plus 10 feet on either side through the state land parcel. That, if we just had a little trail for the Arizona National Scenic Trail and then 10 feet on either side and then the back of people's fences or a big busy road, I don't think that's the recreation opportunity or experience that people hike the Arizona Trail to have. So we may be considering discussing with these property owners and with the Arizona Trail Association if there's places where we can relocate the trail for the benefit of the trail user, not for the benefit of the developer, to make sure that that recreation opportunity is held intact, even if it might need to move slightly. So that relocation is one of the things we'll be discussing. There probably won't be any real public engagement except discussing this with property owners until next summer. But you'll be able to get on mailing lists soon. Probably in the spring, we'll start sending out notices of, do you want to be on the mailing list? How would you like to get involved? And so I wanted to put this out early so you guys have a look at it, because this is the kind of thing that's the hard work of watershed planning. I mean, I know everyone's very excited based on the polling about restoration and research, but we also have to think about how to protect the portions and the connectivity of the Rio through private land that we may not have complete control to prevent development of. So next slide. So there's a lot of assets and challenges on the Rio within the city, and these are just a few of them. And so, you know, we'll have plenty of other time within the series to have discussions and to get in more in depth on more of these. But I'd be glad to try and answer any questions as in the chat as we're listening to the rest of the presentations. And with that, I think I'm done.
Thank you, Sarah. And a couple of questions did come into the chat box if you want to take a look there. And last but not least, Mr. Matt Nelson, you are up.
Thank you so much for having me. So for a moment, just forget everything you know about the Arizona National Scenic Trail and try to follow me, because what we're talking about tonight, of course, is the importance of the watershed. And in order to protect the watershed, what we have to do is recognize what's between the source, which is the peaks themselves, and then the output, which might be like Lake Mary or the Rio itself. And the in-between is the landscape. And all of us are interested in protecting the landscape, but the big question, especially for conservation-minded individuals, is how do we do that? And what I and the Arizona Trail Association believe is that we're stronger together. And that the more people that we can bring together as a community to help protect the landscape, the better. And what I've found in my 45 years of life is that the vast majority of people identify as people who connect with the landscape through outdoor recreation. And so whether you self-identify as a hiker, a runner, a mountain biker, a bird watcher, a forest bather, a traditional cultural practitioner, as long as we have a connection to the landscape, that's the most important thing. And so what the trail, especially the Arizona National Scenic Trail, does is it unites people just as much as it unites landscapes throughout the state. And it's especially important in the Flagstaff area because of the area that it goes and the area that it's been intentionally routed. And in speaking of being stronger together, I think most everybody I've ever met who lives in Flagstaff, whether it's permanently or seasonally, has a strong connection to the landscape. But Flagstaff only represents a very small component of Arizona's overall population. And a lot of people, as you know, who live south in that big city to the south, you also have homes and an interest in the Flagstaff area. But to put it in the context of outdoor recreation, Arizona State Parks and Trails did an economic value of trails survey in 2020, and they found that 59% of all Arizona's adult population, which is over 3 million people, engage in non-motorized trail use every year. And so this is the majority of people who live in the state identify as the outdoor recreation community. And what trails do is they deliver people to the landscape. Like, we don't go for runs and hikes and mountain bike rides, horseback rides. We don't connect with the landscape for the trail itself, but the trail is the mechanism that brings us there. And what I really believe, and it's been, kind of the underlying current in a lot of our environmental education programs with youth, especially in the Flagstaff area, is that people are really only ever going to protect what they absolutely love and are willing to fight for. And in order to get to that place, you have to have an intimate connection with the landscape. And trails do that because they deliver you to a deep portion of the wilderness, whether it's designated wilderness or not, doesn't matter. But it takes you to that beautiful place where you can have your own personal experience that's not prescribed and it's not defined. And so much of what the trail does is allows you to experience the landscape on a personal level, much as you could have 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago. We see trails as much of a cultural and a cultural resource as it is as a recreational resource. So if you go to the next slide, a lot of times people ask, so it seems like the Arizona Trail is all over the place. And it is. It's 800 miles long, starts at the US-Mexico border, and it ends at the Utah border. And as it goes through Flagstaff, it's the only place in the entire trail system where it diverts, and you actually have an option. The south to north route, which is the red line that you see, travels right through the heart of the city, and it utilizes the Flagstaff Urban Trail System, goes along Mount Eldon, crosses over across Schultz Pass Road, eventually Snowball Road, and then along the base of the peaks as it heads north out toward Babbitt Ranch. But as the trail was developed, and our founder is from Flagstaff, Arizona, Dale Shewalter, the realization was also made that an urban trail experience is not what everybody may be interested in, especially for those that are doing a long distance trail adventure on foot or bike or horseback. And so this equestrian route was developed over to the east. And this is particularly beautiful because it goes through Walnut Canyon, crosses underneath the interstate, and then passes by the Rio de Flag, Sandy Seep, and then around Little Eldon Mountain as it connects with the main part of the trail. So if there's ever been confusion about where the Arizona Trail goes, that's understandable because it kind of encompasses Flagstaff. And along those routes, and whether you're using it for a day or an hour or for all 800 miles, it provides an opportunity for kind of this landscape immersion. And protecting the landscape is by far the most important thing that we can do. And I think that our organization and the trail itself really helps build that protection component by providing people these experiences with the landscape. You can go to the next slide. Some of the things that we've done in order to kind of increase engagement in protection are education, because I really do feel like landscape protection comes down to education and stewardship. And so a lot of what we do is we try to get people's hands dirty, because I really do feel like once you connect with the landscape on a visceral level, you're more likely to be interested in it and protect it in the future. So by providing and engaging volunteers in trail construction and maintenance activities, we build a stronger coalition of stewards who are more likely to protect it in the future. I also do feel like the absolute future of protecting these forests and these waters rests within the youth. And so we have a very vibrant outdoor education program, and it's our goal to get every young person from Flagstaff and from other communities through which the Arizona Trail passes out on the Arizona Trail, both to experience it on foot and on bicycle. We use them and engage them in really wonderful stewardship projects like invasive species removal. We also do water quality testing, just as many things as we possibly can to get people excited about where they live and to use the trail to really get them into these landscapes. Because I feel like so often people think that the trail is just this recreational resource. It's not. The hidden agenda is to deliver people to these landscapes to have, you know, these amazing experiences so that they'll be conservationists and stewards in the future. And whether we do that with adults and volunteers, whether we do that with local tribes, we do that with youth, it's all a big part of this landscape protection picture. Because as people have lived across this landscape for thousands of years, they cared for the landscape in a really positive way. And we do feel like stewardship is a shared responsibility. And unless we can properly train and engage people to care for the water and care for the land, then the responsibility falls on folks like Laura Jo and like Sarah and others, who are likely overwhelmed by the enormity of the landscape itself and the responsibility and the number of people that are using it. So if we can really engage the outdoor recreation community in enjoying the landscape in a positive way, and then encouraging them to be stewards through positive education, I really think that we're stronger together. And the more of these hikers, runners, mountain bikers, horseback riders, Native people, as many people as we can bring together and using the trail as that connective tissue, the more likely we are to protect things like the Rio de Flag and the San Francisco Peaks.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, in the remaining 5 minutes, we have one more exercise for you all. Don't panic, because this link will be on the website and you can continue adding data to this throughout the months that we continue working on this. So keep the questions going in the chat box as well. Carrie is going to now lead us through an exercise using ArcGIS 123, which is going to allow you to georeference areas within the watershed and give us some feedback on that. Again, this will stay open and be linked in the website, so we'll provide that information to you when we're done here.
Okay, yeah.
Check
As
out
I,
the
yep,
box.
I am uploading the link to this really cool survey that we get some really interesting information from you guys, but I want to give you guys a quick walkthrough of this survey so you guys know what to expect when you see it. So when you guys open, can you guys see my screens? Yes, thumbs up. Okay, what will happen is it's just 3 questions. This map right here is basically the entire expanse of the Rio de Flag watershed. This is to give you context for the question that's going to come down the way. So first, the question is, where do you like to go in the watershed and what do you like to do there? This is just a text box. Tell us where you go and what you like to do. When you move to question 2, this is where we want a specific point on a map. And the question is, what part of the watershed do you think people need to know more about? And I think especially harking back to this hour-and-a-half of great presentation with robust knowledge and all the aspects of the watershed, where do you think within this watershed people need to know more about? So you're gonna place a pin on there. You can zoom in and out with your trackpad or your mouse, or you can use the plus and minus to zoom in and out. Then the last question is to describe the place that you pinned. So you're going to pin a spot, but you can't describe it in that question. You go down to the last question, and the watershed plan will be outlining areas of knowledge and knowledge gaps. So that's what we're getting at here is, why do people need to know more about this place that you pinned? So I'm going to stop there. It's
Carrie,
in the chat box right now. So everyone should be able to click on that link and it should take you to that survey. And you guys can start answering those questions there. Meanwhile, you can still listen to us chat at you while you're concentrating.
So I wanted to let you all know that 6:59. So you also can end the meeting now and go do that work. And Carrie is going to share the screen. You can see results coming in, which is kind of neat. We are offering to keep the Zoom open for at least another 15 minutes. We're finding that people like to linger, maybe grab a glass of tea or a glass of wine and stay on and have some conversation. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm also going to pull up a flyer for the remaining watershed series. So tonight, thank you so much to the speakers and those of you that joined. And it was kind of a lot, but we wanted to give a broad representation of the landscape and the issues ahead, the cultural history. Beyond this, there will be specific additional speaker series that we would love your input on, and we really want you to join. And so I'm going to now pull up that series, and while you do your So here is the remaining dates for the other series. We've just done the first one tonight, but they come about every 2 weeks starting in December. Some of the speakers you saw tonight, you will be revisiting, I believe they'll be back. And with that, we just really wanted to say thank you to those of you that have to go. This survey that you're doing, you could do it much more than once. So you can find a pin, describe that pin, go back in tonight, put another pin in. Later, you thought of some other area, go to the website, link to the survey. So this is a really interesting way of gathering community feedback during a time when we can't, unfortunately, all gather around maps on a table. So we appreciate your time in thinking through this. And Carrie, you want to say?
mention the recording?
Oh yes, also we have been recording this evening for content. So if you have friends that have missed this evening, we will be putting that on the website. Every speaker series event that we have until February 3rd will be recorded and you can find it on the website. I know there were some folks that asked about that. So thank you to those of you that have to go. And now we're ending the meeting, but if anybody has questions or comments, we are going to keep it open.
And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing just the results that you guys have been submitting, because I always think that's interesting for folks to see as these points start populating on a map. And I think, let me just make sure that I have to hit refresh so we can see the points start popping up. So for those of you still on that want to visit the website, it's Watershed Alliance for the Rio.net. All the speaker series are on there as well as all the links to register for those Zoom meetings. As well as a little bit of background. We will put this link to this survey, excuse me, if you would like to use it, or if you want to send it to a friend to ask them for their input, the more the merrier. So as you guys can see here, we're starting to see some points being populated here on the map. Yeah, oh, cool. It's okay. So the neat thing about this and the way it will,
go ahead, Jill.
The neat thing about how this works with ArcGIS is that I can transfer this data to an ArcGIS map, and for every point, you can then see on the side what folks, the person who put this point on there, what they like to do and where, but then also the important part about that specific point is the historical significance of Walnut Canyon, for example, is what this person put. So it gives us an idea of what places are special, what places there's not enough education and awareness about, what places could potentially have future projects on the landscape. That's kind of our goal in doing these. And ideally, we'll be doing one of these for every speaker series.
Cool. So have fun. Anybody got any questions for remaining speakers that are? They're coming in the chat box still. Yeah, that's good.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. That way I can see everybody's faces. And we can have a discussion if folks would like to post questions, or if you want to raise your hand or shout it out.
Looks like Scott has a question. Scott, if you're still on. Is the watershed important from the standpoint of local water resources, or only from an environmental natural system standpoint? I'm not that knowledgeable on how the local water source is secured. Someone want to answer that who's on the phone? Sarah Dechter has her hand raised. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, so it is from the standpoint of groundwater infiltration. We don't use any surface water in the Rio de Flag watershed for a water source for the city. It comes from a watershed to the south, and then I think maybe it was Tom that mentioned that it also comes from the springs in the inner basin. You know, it's hard to know what exactly the underground connectivity is between all those systems. So there's researchers and geologists who know a lot more about that than I do. But we do look for fissures to put our wells in this watershed. So there's a lot of, I think we talked about cinder soils, but there's also a lot of kind of underground fissures that are part of our geological system. And often we put our wells into spots like that because they tend to be like underground rivers. Aaron Young, who's with our Water Services Division, has really cool maps of all that stuff and really interesting insight into what that looks like in terms of how it affects the city's water sources. So that's who we should follow up with and include if there's more questions on that.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
It's cool to see that.
Refresh it.
Carrie's gonna refresh, and then I asked her to share the results coming in because it's kind of cool to see people's thoughts on their data. I appreciate that. What about the questions we emailed to Andy earlier? Oh goodness, Stephen, let me go pull those up. I think I saw those come in right when we had started working. Are you on the phone? Stephen, if you're on the phone, do you just want to go ahead and ask those questions since we've got, it'd save us some time for me finding them in my email, frankly.
Well, I had some concerns and questions about what's happening up in the Fort Valley area. There's a large area there that becomes a rather substantial lake oftentimes during the year. And there seems to be a lot of home building that's going on in the middle of it, as well as a large amount of dirt is being hauled into the valley and deposited along Snowball Road. So I was just wondering if there's any coordination between the Forest Service, the County of Coconino, and the City of Flagstaff on addressing these issues and how they affect the watershed.
Who would like to take that question?
I have to apologize. I was busy in the chat and I missed the very beginning part of the question. Sorry.
So now you're going to tax my memory.
Are you talking about the large mounds of soil that's on private land just past Snowball Road off
Correct.
of Fort Valley Road?
Correct.
And I think that is the waste material coming from the construction happening. I'm thinking it's new apartments or condos being built along Fort Valley Road in town.
Yeah, I believe that's true.
Yeah, I'm aware of where it's coming from. I'm just wondering if the Friends of the Rio or the city or the county or the Forest Service have looked at what kind of impact that's going to have on the Rio de Flag watershed.
This is Larry Stevens. Those of us who have lived in Flagstaff for 50 years understand what happens to that landscape in a wet winter, and many of those houses are built right at ground level, adding a lot of dirt to that to the snowball side of that kind of natural playa in there will only exacerbate the flooding. So I'm not sure how the county is allowing that construction to go on and that dumping to go on there. I agree. It's going to be a serious problem in a wet year.
Yeah, I don't see anyone from the county on the call today, and I don't know if I know Ed from Stormwater for the city is here. Ed, if that's coming from a city site, do we have any jurisdiction over it?
Oh man, you're dragging me into this.
Yes. I am not a floodplain manager. You are, so you get to answer.
So to give a little history, the county changed their requirements for wastewater systems up in some of these perched aquifer areas, which would include Baderville and that natural meadow in the area. And this is probably 3 to 4 years ago. So when they changed the requirements for the wastewater systems, that's when you really got to see the growth change quite a bit. But this would really be a question for the Coconino County Community Development Group. So John Carr would probably be one of the engineers from the county, probably be one of the better ones to answer the question. From the city side, because this is outside of city jurisdiction, we don't really have much that we can play with here. in terms of coming to the table.
This is Sod Best. I'm a planning and zoning commissioner in the county. And I've asked staff what control we might have in the county over those piles of dirt. To me, it's very concerning. I've been told that there is no ordinance that controls that sort of activity on private property. But I don't really, I'm not satisfied with that. I don't think a lot of people are satisfied with that. And I'll keep asking that question. Obviously, at the level that it's going out there, and I haven't seen it in a couple of weeks, but I can only imagine because it was pretty bad a month ago. It could have effect on what happens during rain on snow in the spring, that sort of thing. And so I'll keep asking that question, but I have asked and been told that the county can't control it at this point with the current ordinance.
I would think that that would be an excavation project of sorts, even though they're bringing stuff in. But anytime that you do any excavating on your property, you have to have a permit for it because it might affect somebody else's property adjacent to you.
That's exactly what I would think as well. But I asked the planning and zoning manager, and he told me there was nothing they could do. But I'll keep asking that question. Actually, I'm going to see him on Friday, and I will tell him it came up. And I was embarrassed to say that the county didn't have a plan. So we'll see if we can get something done.
Thank you, Sod. And we do have contacts, and we have a county partner working on this project. He's not on the call tonight, but we will get an answer for you, Stephen. So thanks for that question. Did you have another question too?
Can I ask a question? This is
Okay,
Barb Phillips. Just to comment on that underneath the dirt of the dirt pile is a really bad infestation of musk thistle and some Scotch thistle, and we were concerned about that before they even started bringing in the extra dirt. So it's a contaminated area now full of noxious weeds that if they remove the dirt to somewhere else, they're going to be spreading all the seeds of those plants. And they were very abundant this year. And so that's an additional issue with that.
Thanks, Barb. Appreciate that. Is Max still on? I want to know the answer to this question. Max, are you still on the call?
I think I saw him getting up.
Yes, I'm still here.
Oh, Matt Nelson wanted to know if there was a Hopi word for the Rio de Flag or name.
I can get with the cultural preservation, see if they have a name.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Stephen, did you have more questions?
Well, it's an ongoing discussion that I know that the Fort Valley Neighborhood Association is also very concerned about. But I think that Sot also made some comments that leads me to think that while the county may have changed some of the wastewater requirements out in the area, they're still giving permits for houses to be built right down into the lake bed. And I think it's kind of ironic that there's a street out here called Lake Trail, and it dead ends right in the area that we're talking about. So obviously, historically, that area has been known as a lake. So that's the only comment I wanted to make.
No problem at all.
Thank you, Stephen. Looks like Carrie's still got information coming in. People are still.
Yep.
Thank you, Laura Jo, for coming. Appreciate your time. Any other questions out there? We've still got 30 people that want to hang out, so appreciate that.
Carrie, I have a question about the ArcGIS Survey 123.
Yep.
Can people all see the results, or is that only something we can see on your side? Like the link takes you straight to the form, but how can we see like actually what other people are putting in? Is that something that's available on the website?
I will make that available for sure. I'm not I'm not sure if that can happen in real time while people are submitting their requests without like me showing it. But I will look into that to make sure that either for the next time that people can look on their own, or that to make sure that this data is viewable. And that you guys can click on it too if you wanted to. You could click on this point and you could get the information from that submission. That's a good question. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Ian. Thanks for coming, Kathy. Oh, let me put up the Watershed series.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing this.
Stop sharing.
So much sharing.
So much sharing. Just in case you forgot, write these dates down. You want to grab Kelly talk about it? Hey, Kelly, are you able to, I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you ready? Can you quickly talk about what we know and who the speakers are going to be briefly for these sessions coming up to entice people to join?
Let's see, do we have, I don't know that I have already access. I can look, but I don't know that I have this.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Good punch.
Yeah. So on December 2nd, we will have Maggie Toomey from the city of Flagstaff and Art Babbitt, who previous county supervisor, long-standing resident of Flagstaff, and ideally Moan Hen from Willow Bend, to speak about community engagement and collaboration and the effects of that within the context of the watershed. For December 16th, Nature Elevated, Benefiting Native Ecosystems. That's the only one that's on the website that currently doesn't have a Zoom link, and that's because we haven't got confirmation yet for our speakers. But
we have a lot to choose from.
Yeah. Larry Stevens, who's on the call, right?
Yes, Larry. It might just be the Larry show, which wouldn't be a bad thing. Sustaining and Healing Our Watershed. I believe that is Tom Whittam, Abe Springer, and Danielle Perry. So Abe Springer from NAU, Tom Whittam from NAU, and Danielle Perry from the Friends of the Rio Flag. January 20th, like Sarah mentioned earlier in the in her talk, the Rio for the People, that's going to be Deb Harris from the Southside Community Association, Jack Welch, previous Citizen of the Year, and I'm blanking on the subsequent folks for that one. And then lastly, for getting work done and creating stewardship, we have Josh Peck, who is the Deputy District Ranger for the Coconino National Forest Flagstaff District, as well as, I believe, Ed Shank from the City of Flagstaff. And these are all tentative, so please don't, we will have the confirmed speaker lists. These are all just straight off the top of my head because I've been trying to organize this lately. But we have some really great speakers from a variety of different organizations and agencies across this series.
And those will be fewer speakers, shorter presentations, more robust dialogue. And there's also time to shape these a little bit within the context of these topics. So if you have things you really want to talk about that would fit into one of these, please throw that into the chat box. Please let us know. We want to make sure that this is heavily driven by the community. So I'm going to give folks just a couple more minutes for any final